All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling eating, feeding, and substance use disorders.
Oh, a fascinating area.
Yeah, you sent her some lecture notes, and wow, there's a lot to unpack
It's
here.
a broad spectrum for sure.
Definitely. And, this is something that touches everyone in some way.
Absolutely, either personally or through someone we know.
Exactly.
Mm,
So, our mission today is to give everyone a solid overview of the main categories,
right, and we'll look at some of the surprising facts and stats too.
for sure. And hopefully help people understand the interplay of, biology,
Mm,
psychology, and even social factors.
that's all connected.
It really is. Okay, so the notes start by making it clear that eating disorders aren't just about food.
Right, it goes way beyond that.
It's about body image.
Yeah, that distorted perception of yourself.
Right. And the notes emphasize that the consequences can be really severe.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And one thing that's important to remember is that these disorders exist on a continuum.
Okay, so not just neat categories.
No, not at all. Someone might not fit perfectly into anorexia or bulimia, but that doesn't mean they're not struggling.
Right. That spectrum idea is really key because it makes you realize how many shades of gray there are.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So speaking of, the notes jump right into anorexia nervosa, and they outline the two main types,
Mm,
restricting and binge eating purging.
right, and that distinction is important.
Yeah, and the thing that's highlighted with anorexia, even if someone is binging and purging, is that distorted body image.
Absolutely. It's a key feature.
So someone could be dangerously thin and still see themselves as overweight.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that we don't always see ourselves accurately.
That disconnect is pretty unsettling. And then there's that statistic about anorexia having the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric disorder.
It's a harsh reality.
Yeah, that's a tough one to swallow, honestly.
And most of those deaths are from medical complications.
Wow, so the body just can't handle the strain?
Sadly, no.
That really puts the seriousness of these disorders into perspective.
Okay, so then the notes shift gears to bulimia nervosa.
Which is, a different kind of struggle.
Right, even though purging can be involved in both.
Yeah, but with bulimia, you see that cyclical pattern of binge eating followed by purging.
Okay, and then other compensatory behaviors.
Exactly. But often, individuals with bulimia maintain a normal weight.
So it's almost like a hidden struggle in a way.
It can be, yeah.
It's not as visually apparent.
Right.
Now, I did notice that when it comes to treatment, the notes point out that fluoxetine is the only medication specifically approved for bulimia.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, makes you wonder what's so unique about the neurochemistry there.
It does raise some questions.
But of course, medication is just one piece of the puzzle.
Oh, for sure. Therapy is crucial, too.
Absolutely, you've got to unpack those underlying emotional and psychological factors.
Right, it's about getting to the root of the issue.
Exactly. All right, so moving on to what the notes say is the most prevalent eating disorder: binge eating disorder, or BED. And this one has some key differences.
Yeah, the notes emphasize the lack of purging here.
Right, no compensatory behaviors.
So it's all about those recurring episodes of, like, consuming large amounts of food
Yeah, that feeling of being out of control.
and the distress that comes with it,
Exactly.
but no attempt to, like, compensate afterward.
No, that's a key distinction.
So it's a very different experience, both physically and emotionally.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered the big three, right?
The most well-known ones, yeah.
But the notes mention a few more that I honestly had never even heard of,
Oh, there are so many.
like ARFA, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder.
That one's interesting.
It is. And what the notes point out is that it's not driven by body image concerns, like anorexia.
Right, it's different.
It often stems from, like, sensory sensitivities.
Yeah, aversions to certain textures or smells, maybe.
Okay, so maybe even a fear of choking or vomiting.
Could be. And it's often linked with autism spectrum disorder.
Yeah, the notes say up to 80% of kids with ARFAD might also meet the criteria for autism.
It's a significant overlap.
So suddenly it's not just picky eating.
No, it's a whole different way of experiencing food.
It really highlights how important it is to look beyond just the behavior and consider, the neurological and developmental factors.
Absolutely, there's always more to the story.
Okay, and then you have pica, which
Mhm.
involves eating non-nutritive substances.
Like dirt or paint chips.
Yeah, that one's definitely surprising
It can be, yeah.
and potentially dangerous, depending on what's being ingested.
Oh, absolutely.
The notes mention links to intellectual impairment and pregnancy.
It's an area that needs more research.
Yeah, are there certain states that make pica more likely?
That's a great question, and honestly, we don't have all the answers yet.
It seems like there's so much we still don't know about these less common disorders.
There's always more to learn.
Then there's rumination disorder, which the notes describe as the repeated regurgitation of food.
Ugh, that sounds distressing.
It does, both physically and socially, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And it's often tied to emotional stress or other mental health conditions.
Wow, so it's a reminder that our relationship with food is so deeply intertwined with our overall well-being.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It's not just about fuel,
It's about so much more.
it's about emotions, coping mechanisms.
And sometimes deeper psychological struggles.
It's striking how diverse these eating and feeding disorders are. We've gone from the very visually apparent to those that are much more internal and hidden.
It's a wide range, for sure.
And I think that's a powerful takeaway for anyone listening. We can't judge someone's internal struggles based on outward appearances.
I wholeheartedly agree.
There's so much going on beneath the surface.
Always.
Okay, so the notes then shift gears to elimination disorders, specifically encopresis and enuresis.
Ah,
It feels like we're moving from one sensitive topic to another here.
It can be a tough conversation, but an important one.
For sure. So encopresis is basically fecal incontinence,
Right.
and enuresis is bedwetting.
Yeah. Those terms can be a mouthful.
They can. And these might seem like straightforward physiological issues.
But they're not always.
No, the notes stress that they can be incredibly emotionally taxing, especially for kids.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine the anxiety of dealing with that at school.
Right. Or even at a sleepover.
Exactly.
It's easy to forget how much these things can impact a child's self-esteem.
And their social life.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So it's crucial to address not just the physical symptoms, but also the psychological distress.
A holistic approach is key.
For sure. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground with eating and feeding disorders, and now the notes take us into the realm of substance use disorders.
Okay, shifting gears a bit.
Yeah, and this is where the brain disease model really comes into focus.
Right, it's not just about willpower or making better choices.
Exactly. These are complex brain diseases.
Absolutely. We've come a long way in understanding them that way.
And I noticed the notes specifically mention the DSM-5 moving away from abuse and dependence as separate categories.
It was a big change.
Yeah, now it's all under the umbrella of substance use disorder with varying levels of severity,
That's right, recognizing the spectrum.
which again I think is so important.
It helps destigmatize the conversation.
Exactly. Because someone might not fit the classic image of an addict, but they could still be experiencing significant impairment.
Absolutely, and needing help.
That spectrum idea, it's so important.
It is.
And I think it applies to all the disorders we've talked about today.
I agree.
It helps us see the human beings behind the labels.
Exactly, each with their own unique journey.
All right, so we've set the stage for understanding substance use disorders as brain diseases. Now, the notes dive into specific substances, and they start with a pretty extensive list. Nicotine, alcohol, marijuana, heroin, cocaine, the usual suspects.
It's a long list.
It is. And it's worth noting that even though these substances have different effects, they all share that ability to hijack the brain's reward system.
Right, the common denominator.
It's all about that dopamine rush,
That feeling of pleasure or relief.
which, of course, keeps people coming back for more.
It's a powerful cycle.
It really is. But then the notes also mention process addictions.
No, those are fascinating.
I'd never really considered that concept before.
It really expands our understanding of addiction.
It does.
Yeah.
So it's not just about substances, it's about behavior.
Exactly.
So things like gambling, internet gaming, shopping, even sex, those can become addictive.
Because they activate those same reward pathways in the brain.
Wow, so the brain doesn't discriminate.
Nope, not at all.
If something triggers that reward system, it can become addictive.
It's a powerful realization.
Okay, so we've got this big picture of addiction, and now it looks like the notes are going to zero in on alcohol use disorder as a specific example.
A good one to focus on.
I'm guessing this is where we'll get into, like, the nitty-gritty detail.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts of how addiction plays out in the brain and the body.
I'm ready to dive deep. Let's see what these notes have to reveal about the tangled web of alcohol and the human brain.
It's a fascinating story. So alcohol use disorder, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, we all know that initial buzz can feel good.
Right, but the notes really highlight how alcohol, it starts as a sedative, bringing on that euphoria.
Yeah.
But ultimately it leads to,
Distress.
distress. Yeah,
It's a cycle.
it is. So what's the actual mechanism there? Like what's happening in the brain when we feel that initial buzz?
Well, alcohol interacts with the brain's reward system,
Okay.
leading to a surge of dopamine.
Dopamine, the pleasure chemical.
Exactly. It's like the neurochemical equivalent of, feeling good.
So it's not just in our heads. There's a real chemical reaction.
Oh, absolutely. But here's where it gets tricky. As you keep drinking, your brain, it kind of adapts to the alcohol being there.
It gets used to it.
It does, and it starts producing less dopamine naturally.
Interesting.
So it becomes more reliant on the alcohol to trigger those reward responses.
So the brain's like, hey, I need that external source of dopamine now. Exactly. And that's when you get caught in the trap.
Oh, I see.
Because over time, you need more and more alcohol to get that same level of euphoria.
Right, that's tolerance building up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you stop drinking, well, your brain's in a deficit, right?
Sense.
And that leads to those withdrawal symptoms, anxiety, insomnia, you name it.
And in severe cases, any seizures, right?
Yeah, it can be pretty rough.
It's amazing how something that starts out so enjoyable can turn into this, like, physiological battle.
It is. And
The notes also talk about the DSM-5 criteria for diagnosing alcohol use disorder.
right.
And it's not just about how much someone drinks.
No, it's more nuanced than that.
It's about things like impaired control,
Mm.
social impairment,
Risky use.
and physical effects like tolerance and withdrawal.
Right. So it's asking questions like, are you continuing to drink even though it's causing problems?
In your relationships or at work.
Yeah. Or are you experiencing those withdrawal symptoms when you try to cut back?
Okay, so it's really looking at the bigger picture.
It is. And, we briefly mentioned alcohol withdrawal delirium.
Yeah, delirium tremens.
That's a serious one.
Sounds terrifying, honestly.
It can be. It's a medical emergency,
Wow.
Severe confusion, hallucinations, seizures.
And if it's not treated promptly,
It can be fatal.
yeah, definitely something to catch early. Now, the notes make it clear that the causes of substance use disorders, they're complicated.
Multifaceted, yeah.
It's not just one thing.
No, it's like
A perfect storm.
a perfect storm, yeah.
No,
Genetics, neurobiology, your environment, social factors.
all coming together.
Exactly. You might have a genetic predisposition,
Okay.
then throw in some, adverse childhood experiences, maybe a bit of peer pressure.
Yeah.
Boom, you've got a much higher risk of developing a substance use disorder.
It really shows how interconnected everything is.
It is. And,
The notes also mention co-occurring mental health conditions.
right, those are important to consider.
Things like ADHD, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety.
It's common to see these alongside substance use disorders.
It's almost like they go hand in hand.
They do, which means treatment needs to address both.
Right, a holistic approach.
Exactly. And there's the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACES study.
I've heard of that.
It was groundbreaking.
In what way?
Well, it showed the link between childhood trauma
Okay.
and substance use later in life.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is. It reminds us that our early experiences can really shape our vulnerabilities
Yeah, like those early traumas become a blueprint for how we cope with stress.
and difficult emotions.
Exactly. Now, the notes go on to define some key terms related to substance use.
Okay, the basics.
Addiction, intoxication, tolerance, withdrawal, dependence.
Important to understand those distinctions.
Is there one that you think is particularly important to clarify?
One that often gets overlooked is the difference between dependence and addiction.
Okay, yeah, those terms are often used interchangeably.
But they're not the same. Dependence is, it's basically a physiological adaptation.
So your body gets used to the substance.
Right. And when you stop using, you experience withdrawal.
Okay.
But addiction, that's a step further.
How so?
It's that compulsive drug-seeking behavior.
Even despite negative consequences.
Exactly. You're not just physically dependent, you're mentally and emotionally hooked.
So you could be dependent on a medication, for example, without being addicted to it.
Exactly.
Mm.
Subtle but important difference.
It is. And then there's the whole phenomenon of blackouts,
Oh, yes.
which are often associated with excessive alcohol consumption.
Right, those periods of amnesia.
It's like you're there, but you're not really there.
You might seem like you're functioning normally, but you have zero memory of what happened.
That sounds kind of scary, like a complete loss of control.
It can be, yeah.
So the notes then move into the specifics of treating alcohol use disorder.
Okay, getting into solutions.
And what I noticed is there's this whole range of approaches. Medication, psychosocial interventions.
It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And the first step, it seems, is understanding the different types of problematic drinking.
Right. Where do you fall on the spectrum?
Safe drinking limits, binge drinking, heavy drinking,
It's about recognizing the risks associated with your patterns.
and being aware of those long-term consequences.
Yeah, things like fetal alcohol spectrum disorders.
FASDs.
Right, a stark reminder of the potential impact on future generations.
And it's totally preventable.
That's the hard part.
It is. because when a pregnant woman drinks, that alcohol goes straight to the feeder, and their little brains and bodies, they're so vulnerable.
The damage can be devastating.
It's heartbreaking to think about the challenges those children face. And then there's Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome.
Another serious consequence?
It's a brain disorder, right,
Caused by thiamine deficiency.
which is often seen in people with chronic alcohol use.
Right, because alcohol interferes with the body's ability to absorb thiamine.
And thiamine is essential for brain function.
It is, which is why you see those memory problems and cognitive impairment.
Alcohol's impact on the brain is just, it's so widespread.
It affects everything.
Memory, coordination, decision-making, you name it. But the good news is that we have ways to intervene, right?
We do.
We talked about screening tools like the AUDIT.
And the CAGE questionnaire.
Those can help identify people who might be at risk.
Early identification is key.
Absolutely. And then there are medications like acamprosate, naltrexone, and disulfiram.
All FDA approved for alcohol use disorder.
It's incredible that we have these pharmacological tools.
They can be really helpful.
And they each work a little differently, right?
Yeah, they target different parts of that addiction cycle.
So naltrexone blocks the pleasurable effects of alcohol,
Reducing cravings.
while acamprosate helps manage those withdrawal symptoms,
Exactly. It's about finding the right medication for the individual.
tailoring the treatment.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't forget about those psychosocial interventions.
Right, things like cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing.
Those are crucial.
So cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, it helps people identify those negative thought patterns
Then behaviors.
that contribute to their drinking,
It's about equipping them with coping skills.
to manage those cravings and
Yes,
triggers.
exactly. It's like rewiring the brain in a way.
And motivational interviewing. That sounds interesting.
It's a very collaborative approach.
Yeah,
It's about helping people explore their ambivalence, about changing.
they're drinking.
Yeah. And tapping into their own motivation to make those positive changes.
So it's not about forcing them into a particular path,
No, it's about empowering them.
to take ownership of their recovery.
Exactly.
It seems like the most effective treatment plans involve a combination of these approaches.
Absolutely.
Medication, therapy, maybe even support groups.
Lifestyle changes.
Yeah, it's a holistic approach.
It has to be, because addiction is complex, right?
It is, and it affects so many areas of a person's life.
Their physical health, mental health, their social support system,
It's about addressing the whole person.
their overall well-being.
Exactly. Well, we've certainly gone deep on alcohol use disorder,
We have
from the neurobiology to the treatment options.
a thorough overview.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how much we've learned about this condition and all the progress that's been made in terms of, like, effective interventions.
It's encouraging.
It is. But the notes you send over, they cover this vast landscape of substance use.
Oh, yeah, there's so much more to explore.
And I'm definitely curious to delve into some of those other commonly misused substances.
We've only just scratched the surface.
So where do we go next in this deep dive? All right. So we really dug into alcohol use disorder,
We did.
but there's so many other substances to cover.
Oh, yeah, a whole world of
Possibilities.
possibilities, yeah. But, even though the specifics of each substance are different, that underlying mechanism, that addiction piece, it's pretty consistent.
Right, that hijacking of the reward system.
Mhm. That craving for the dopamine. Yeah, whether it's a drug or a behavior.
And speaking of behaviors, before we move on,
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on those process addictions
Yeah,
again.
the non-substance ones, right?
Exactly. It's just so fascinating to me.
It is. It is. Because what we're seeing is that the brain,
Yeah.
it responds to those rewarding behaviors
Mm.
in a similar way to how it responds to substances.
So like gambling,
Mm-hmm.
gaming, shopping sprees,
All triggering those same dopamine pathways.
leading to those cravings and that compulsive engagement.
Right. It's like our brains are hardwired for pleasure seeking.
And sometimes the wiring gets a little crossed.
It does. The notes focus on gambling as a key example.
Yeah, what is it about gambling that's so addictive?
Well, there's the intermittent reinforcement.
Meaning?
You don't win every time, right?
Right.
So it keeps you hooked, always hoping for that next big win.
Makes sense. And there's the adrenaline, too.
Oh, for sure. The excitement of the game.
And for some people, it might be a way to escape.
To escape stress, yeah, or negative emotions.
It's interesting how those same elements, the anticipation, the reward, the escape, we see them in substance use disorders, too.
We do.
Yeah.
And then you've got internet gaming disorder.
Which is becoming more and more recognized as a real issue.
It is. And, there are red flags to watch for.
Like what?
Excessive gaming that interferes with life, you know?
So neglecting responsibilities
Work, school, relationships.
because they're spending all their time gaming.
Yeah, or experiencing those withdrawal symptoms when they're not gaming.
Irritability,
Yeah.
anxiety.
That kind of thing.
So it's more than just a hobby at that point.
It is. It's a problem.
It really makes you think about how technology is shaping our vulnerabilities.
It's a new frontier, that's for sure.
We've created this whole new landscape of potential tricks.
Of rewards, yeah.
So we need to be mindful.
Absolutely. Set healthy boundaries.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get back to substances.
Back to the drugs.
The notes cover a bunch, starting with the nicotine.
Ah, the big one.
Huge public health issue.
It is. And you know, it's interesting because the immediate effects of nicotine,
Yeah.
they don't seem as intense as like cocaine or heroin.
Right, so why is it so addictive?
Well, nicotine is a stimulant. It hits those dopamine receptors, gives you that feeling of alertness, pleasure, but it has a very short half-life. It clears out of your system quickly
So you need more.
to keep those effects going.
And that leads to that constant cycle of craving and use.
Exactly. You're always chasing that feeling
Wow, it's like this constant need to top up the nicotine.
to avoid those withdrawal symptoms, yeah.
And then there's marijuana.
Which is, you know, more accepted these days.
It is, both medically and recreationally.
But the notes stress that it can still be addictive,
Oh, for sure. So marijuana contains THC,
which binds to those cannabinoid receptors in the brain.
leading to all those effects.
Yeah.
Relaxation, euphoria, the altered senses.
Right. But with regular use, the brain can become dependent.
On the THC.
Yeah, and then you get cravings and withdrawal when you stop.
So again, it's that same cycle.
It is. It seems like any substance that messes with that reward system.
Has that potential.
For addiction, yeah, even the ones we think of as less harmful.
Okay, let's talk about the heavier drugs.
The hard stuff.
Heroin and cocaine.
Those are the ones people really associate with serious addiction.
And for good reason.
Oh yeah, heroin is an opioid.
Okay.
It floods the brain with dopamine.
Creating that intense euphoria.
Exactly.
Right.
But it's also highly addictive and dangerous.
High risk of overdose.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
And cocaine being a stimulant.
Works a little differently.
Right.
Cocaine blocks the reuptake of dopamine.
Meaning,
The dopamine hangs around in the synapse longer.
so the effects are amplified.
Exactly. You get that energy, alertness, euphoria, but it puts a huge strain on your heart.
Increasing the risk of...
Heart attack, stroke.
It's scary how these substances can be so rewarding and so damaging at the same time.
They are. They are. And then you've got the hallucinogens.
LSD, PCP.
Those are in a different category, you know?
More about altering perception than that dopamine rush.
Yeah, they disrupt communication between different parts of the brain.
Leading to...
Profound changes in how you perceive things, your mood, your thoughts.
So LSD can cause hallucinations, synesthesia, that distorted sense of time.
Right, and PCP can make you feel detached, dissociated, even aggressive.
It's like they take you on a completely different mental journey.
One that's not always safe.
No. It's a reminder that substance use is a spectrum.
It is.
From mild stimulants like caffeine to powerful hallucinogens that can completely alter your reality.
And it's important to approach it all with nuance.
Right, with understanding.
There's no one-size-fits-all addict
It can affect anyone.
from any background.
And we need to address those underlying factors.
The biology, the psychology, the social context.
It's about seeing the whole picture.
It is. You know,
Yeah.
this deep dive for me,
Yeah.
it's been less about specific substances
Mm.
and more about understanding addiction itself
How it takes root in the brain, how it shows up in our behavior.
and how we can help people who are struggling
Exactly. It's about moving beyond that judgment and stigma.
toward a more compassionate approach.
A more evidence-based approach to prevention and treatment.
Well said.
Well, this has certainly been eye-opening,
It has.
and I appreciate you taking the time to guide us through this complex topic.
My pleasure.
Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Just this. Addiction is a disease, not a character flaw. It's treatable, and recovery is possible. So if you or someone you know is struggling, reach out. There is help available. There is hope.
Thank you for that. And to our listeners, we hope you found this deep dive informative and thought-provoking. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.